Stunning news. JP Morgan is looking for lower gold and silver prices in 2022. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. Unfortunately, tonight, some rather discouraging news. I know we speak to a lot of silver investors here on the Arcadia channel, and I have Galen McNamera of Summa Silver joining me, my walking soundbite friend, to comment on some of these issues because, Galen, I don't know if you have to leave and make a press release to your shareholders partway through this, I understand, but stunning news, JP Morgan is looking for lower gold and silver prices in 2022. So before we dig into this and whether people should just go call their broker, dump everything they have, and load up on treasuries right as the Let's Go Brandon administration is really putting the juice on this baby. But before we dig into that, Galen, it's great to have you back on the show in light of this fantastic JP Morgan news. So how are you today, sir?
I'm good, Chris. It's great to be back. I haven't really seen you much since we did Silverfest a good month and a half ago or something, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. A month and a half has gone by. I miss you, and I haven't seen many of any people too much. I've been getting silver in, and now we've started getting silver out to many of our Silverfest winners. Now, I might add, if you won silver at Silverfest, the big chunks have gone out. The smaller ones, they'll be on their way. They're not out yet, but everyone who won, I do fully intend and looking forward to getting your silver to you. And thank you all for participating in Silverfest 2. Where Galen McNamara was quite a hit there, hanging out with Keith Newmeyer, talking silver stocks and leadership and all of these important things, and which I think is why you're well served as not only an executive of a company that is going to be responsible to provide silver to the market if we want to continue using electronics like computers and cell phones, but you have shareholders to answer. So a unique position where you see the silver market from many different perspectives. And now JP Morgan, who has an interesting role in the silver market, they're calling for lower gold and silver prices. So without having studied the full report yet, Galen, I'm trying to get a copy myself, but what would you say as investors are reading that headline?
You got it. So first of all, don't even bother reading the full report. Just as soon as you get it, just throw it straight into the garbage, pretty much, right? But I would ask the question, hey, if they're looking for lower gold and silver prices in 2022, and people are selling silver, I wonder who's actually doing the buying, right now. If they're saying that it's going to be lower, maybe it's like kind of like whatever they say to do the opposite, and you might be more successful.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that, because I have my hobby here of reading the headlines, guessing which way things are being gamed. Now here, the report said JP Morgan retains bearish bias. They already talk like bankers and lawyers right off the bat. Yeah. I mean, who talks like that? But they retain bearish bias for the prices of gold and silver during its latest forecast, projecting an average price of $1,630 per ounce for gold and $20.48 for silver in 2022. So I guess for silver investors, pretty much a flat year, according to JP Morgan's expert analysis. Now, Galen, we won't dig into whether that's the same JP Morgan here that paid $60 million to settle a precious metals spoofing lawsuit. So I don't know if they're planning to spoof the gold price to 1630, similar to how they've spoofed silver repeatedly in the face of their Rico charges close to 2048. But what do you think about these prices? 1630 for gold next year and 2048 for silver. You buying or selling on those?
Buying for sure. I mean, hey, if anytime you see the prices like that, I'm probably stocking up. I stocked up on gold and silver this week, kind of significantly for me personally. So I think anytime it dips, there's a good chance to be buying. But whether or not it gets to that point, well, hey, their guess is as good as anyone's, I guess. But I think at those prices, it gives them a good shot at building a long position and maybe starting to unwind their shorts of which they have concentrated short positions, like all these big banks do, right? All these bullion banks. So whether they say it or not. So I think it's in their best interest to say that the prices are going to be lower, and that's all that you can kind of glean from an article like this.
Yeah, especially because the bank added that expect rebasing higher in long end US nominal yields to weigh on gold over the medium term. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? I mean, they actually
exactly.
managed to talk like a brochure.
Yeah. And you hear this talk at the Fed meeting about taper this week. And I mean, those guys are playing chicken right now with the economy. Like any chance of tapering, and they say they're going to do it, but just look at the history, and I don't think they can. You start thinking about tapering, you start thinking about increasing rates significantly, like 3 times in a row, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot of people. It's going to hurt a lot of Main Street people, and it's going to hurt a lot of people who maybe have debt issues or maybe over leveraged mortgages. And I'd be just really surprised if they actually had the stones to do something like that.
Well, Galen, I think it's quite astute and brilliant what you're pointing out there. Although, seeing between the lines, reading perhaps what is not clear initially or what is often hidden, I would suggest that if we did the Arcadia box pool, and I got to go first since it was my pool, I would take the box of what is. Now, I cannot guarantee this. Certainly there's many things it's based on, a lot of which I discussed on the show, some of which I have not. But if I had to guess of what would be the most likely of potentially many possible outcomes, what if the reset is underway? Everything we heard about Basel III, whether it was on a schedule that what I or Andrew Maguire or anybody else thought, maybe it wasn't all supposed to be like June 28th, gold is 10,000 an ounce, but I've heard it described as similar to the warning to get on sides. And when you see, I mean, we're getting 7% inflation prints in the CPI, 9%, 10% PPI. You're running a company where you have to actually pay for that.
Well, and you know what, Chris, though, the thing is, like, those are fantasy numbers. That's not real, right? If you look at the CPI, it's like home prices aren't included, right? The way that we calculate the CPI now and the PPI versus like the 80s is vastly different. And it's been manipulated to make it work, to make it look worse than it, or make it look not as bad as it actually is, right? So the real inflation rate is got to be what? I don't know. Even if you just include home prices, and you're not playing with the numbers, and there's not a guy at the Fed going, okay, well, let's take oranges out, let's put grapefruits in, which for sure they're doing, then what's the real rate of inflation? It's got to be 10% plus.
Could you imagine if actually the real plan for the Fed, they call up Eddie Murphy, is like, we got to put orange juice in and take out the GI Joe with the Kung Fu grip,
right? I mean, that there's games like that being played.
Well, Galen, those Kung Fu grips, they're going up 9.6% a year, and that's just according to the government numbers. So,
yeah,
government's got to eat too.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, then you tack on that they're saying now we're going to raise interest rates. We got a glimpse when they tried raising interest rates 2018, and the thing was collapsing by Christmas time. So if they're really raising interest rates, the only way this debt bomb structure can afford that is if you're doing something else along that. And I would wonder if the reset, I mean, Davos theme this year, the Great Reset. I mean, they're putting some clues out there. And I mean, now it's getting silly. I mean, they've turned the financial market, it's like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, because you have Powell say he's going to raise interest rates. The stock market still goes up.
Yeah.
The bonds rally. I mean, it almost feels as if it's like they don't even care about keeping the illusion anymore. What would you say to that?
With everything that's happening, it's like a strange, bizarro fantasy world where, the stock market is in a bubble. Obviously, inflation is running pretty hot and probably way worse than we're actually being told. And, at the same time, you've got, a lot of debt out there. So, I mean, there's very few ways for the average person to come out on top of this. Very few ways. And, you know, that my whole thesis is that, you know, precious metals is one of them.
Well, I would certainly agree, even if that hasn't really been the case yet. I mean, and I was reading some article today where they're saying that silver is a great inflation hedge. And I would say in a world where we had some sort of regulation on Wall Street, rather than the CFTC commissioner tamping down the price for the banks. And Galen, did you ever see that part of the CFTC where I found they actually have JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs vote on the policy structure that they used along with the MREC and the CCP. They had you hear Ross Benham having JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs vote on the CCP's market structure to rig the metals. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party, they must be watching and blushing with that advertising. But I mean, it's like, and once people notice and you point it out, in fact, Galen, I'd love to get your comment on this, because while JP Morgan is crunching the numbers and they come up with lower gold and silver prices, you know, they're saying that the current price of the yellow metal reflects the uncertainty surrounding the Fed policy and the speed of the QE reduction and rate rises.
Yeah.
And, you know, I did my stint on Wall Street in my misguided youth. I was young, I needed the money. But, you know, we grow up, we have a little common sense. And if we're not thieves, then eventually you're like, wait a second, well, that's complete horseshit. Because
look at the balance sheet.
Yeah, here's the balance sheet. We look at the all, we go back. So here we are, 2007, 2008. First 95 years of the Federal Reserve, we're up to $900 billion. Then, you know, pops up over, here's all that time where they were telling us about how they were going to taper. And that's why gold came down from 1900 in 2011. Here's gold, 1900, what was it, September of 2011. You're at 3 trillion. Now we're at 8 trillion. So if they slow down the pace of how much they're adding, does that, at least from a long-term standpoint of value, and whenever there is some recalibration in pricing, does any of this shit the Fed's saying actually even matter when we're up here?
The damage is being done, has been done. They're not, you know, they're not taking anything off the balance sheet. It's just growing at a lesser rate of speed, right? So I mean, that's we're being sold as that's a savior somehow. I don't understand.
I mean, it's like Jerome Powell, he drank so much whiskey, like he had to slow down. So now he's like chugging beers, you know, he's spilling half of it all over himself, you know, knocking them on the table, but he's slowing the pace. And he slowed the pace so much that even CNBC is like turning their back on him. Powell's fourth major shift raises questions about the Fed policy. Now, I don't know if that's because all the Fed governors and ex-Goldman Sachs officials got caught front running their own policy. I don't know if that's what finally alerted the questions about their credibility. Galen, as someone who runs a company and is an investor, where does that leave you with the Fed's credibility?
Well, I think it should be, you know, their credibility with everyone should be exactly zero, because what they're saying they're going to do and what they're actually going to do is pretty obviously at this point two different things, right? So it'll be an interesting next few months to see if they actually taper, to see if they actually raise rates, because it's going to hurt a lot of people. But if they don't do that, inflation's going to, you know, continue to be wild, and there's really no win for them, which means it almost means it's hard for us to win too. But I mean, you just have to act accordingly given that information, right? And how do we hedge against inflation? Hopefully it's hard commodities.
Yeah, and as you can see here, no tapers so far. Now, it's interesting, if you actually follow some of these political headlines, I believe the government's been tapering, because remember a couple months ago, it was 3.5 trillion. As you can see, fireworks season has started here. The Biden budget was 3.5 trillion. Joe Manchin was blocking that. That came down to 1 trillion. Now, they've already promised that money. So that's, and we saw the stock market get juiced on when they announced it. Now, of course, the stock market doesn't come back any lower, but I think we're getting to the point where these things are so obvious that people can't ignore it anymore. I mean, here's Mr. Transitory, and even he's admitting he's wrong. And then,
Yeah,
you
well,
know,
yeah,
while
yeah.
JP Morgan, they don't talk about the hyperinflation of the currency that's going on. You know, maybe it's time for investors to start saying, I don't care what JP Morgan thinks, except if I'm using it as a contrarian indicator, because what does JP Morgan do? They tell their real things off record. Because today, JP Morgan hit with $200 million in fines for letting employees use WhatsApp to evade regulators' reach. And again, this wasn't a one off. You can read through here as widespread, admitting to widespread record keeping failures. Oh, the CFTC also said it fined the bank 75 million for allowing unimproved communications.
And that's
Yet
just a
people,
footnote at the end of the article. What were, like what was that concerning? I guess we don't know. You could probably find out in an access to information, request, but who knows?
well, actually, Galen, it's funny you mentioned that because my beautiful team of volunteers and we've started organizing. We're putting Silver Bounty prizes for people who do the best job of submitting and following up with Freedom of Information Act requests. CFTC, they even have a page on their website with instructions. So,
Yeah, there you
since they
go.
won't talk to me, we'll do that. And Galen, last JP Morgan question, then we'll get into a little
Okay.
silver supply and Summa. But we saw last year when the COVID news broke anyway, silver goes down to $12, and shortly after that it had busted up to 29 before it was tamped down by, the MRAC and CCP market structure. But now apparently in their list of services, JP Morgan is covering Corona. There's no market they're not an expert in. And although despite the Omicron that's coming after everybody, JP Morgan affirms end of coronavirus in 2022. So what impact might you expect that to happen? Or should we just say, JP Morgan, why are you talking about this?
Yeah, hey, as far as that goes for me, I think all bets are off. This emergence of this new variant. I mean, up here in Canada, here in BC, especially today, they're really putting back in a bunch of new regulations. Only half capacity sports events and things like that. So it's certainly not looking better right now.
Now, Galen, what are the odds that you'd be willing to bet me some Summa Silver shares that I could find a connection between COVID and JP Morgan profiting off of it? But we will leave that aside.
They're low. I'm not going to bet you on that one.
Although, again, from everything you're seeing, you talk to investors, you talk to shareholders, and you're seeing the supply side. Obviously, you follow the sector closely and understand it at a much higher level than I do because of your experience. What are you seeing on the supply side? Are things getting easier? I know it's harder for companies in the silver to put a green light on projects at $21, $22 than 28, 29. Anything you can share on the supply side?
Sure. On the supply side, we have about 800 million ounces of primary silver production a year in that neighborhood. And, with that in mind, we're depleting reserves every year. There was a gap in exploration, a lull in exploration over the last bear market, after, kind of mid 20 teens type of thing. And I know from experience, because, me being a geologist and my life is finding silver deposits, silver and gold deposits. Good projects are really hard to find. New discoveries are really hard to make. So, I mean, there's a supply crunch coming at some point. But I think the real story, Chris, is the demand picture that I think we're going to see going forward here in the next few years. And I always tell people silver is like a really interesting ESG metal because now it's being used significantly in EVs, significantly in solar panels, and then significantly in other like high tech, electrical things because of its conductance is actually higher than gold, which surprised me when I learned about that. So, if you think about governments mandating, all of this renewable energy like solar panels, and even actually more impact, all of these EVs that we're going to have to make. And right now we're making something like a little over maybe say 5 to 10 million EVs a year out of 100 million cars being made on the road. I mean, well, if you take that and you say we're making half EVs every year, you're going to need hundreds of millions of ounces of silver in excess of what we produce today, maybe even double that if you want to make a full switch. And that's just for EVs. That doesn't even include any of the other traditional uses or any of the other new uses, like what goes into solar panels. And that's growing at 30-40% a year in terms of demand. So, that coupled with, supply tightening somewhat, I think really, even if you throw out the whole inflation argument, and the whole scary monetary stuff that's going on, like silver is going to be a metal that's in demand for the coming decades in a way that's much, much stronger than today.
Yeah, and Galen, on the some of the times you've been on the show previously, you've talked about how it's for the companies, it's also harder to find the labor, the good geologists, the people with specific
Right.
skill sets, and of
Yeah.
course, you're also facing you're eating that PPI 9.6% producer
Yeah.
inflation. Can you
Big
touch
time.
on update us on how that looks now?
It's the same as it was a few months ago. I mean, compared to a year ago, it's only getting worse. But I'll give you an example. So when I first started Summa in the spring of 2020, and we started drilling in the summer of 2020, say July, I could get all the drills I needed. I could get all the manpower I needed, all of the drilling supplies I needed, like boom, within a couple weeks. Now you're looking at months and months. You have to plan that far ahead, and that's very difficult to do because a lot of your planning is based on results. So we don't know our results until X time, and we want to move 2 weeks after that. Now we have to move months after that, right? Because we're just waiting. So it's certainly an interesting time to be in the silver exploration space in that regard.
I hear you, and you can't hedge that on the COMEX. Although, Galen, with all that said, to the folks who are watching, many of whom are invested in silver stocks, where depending on when you got in, if you're looking at your P&L, there could be like a little bit of red. It could be gushing blood. If you're crazy enough to have an option book like myself, it could be hemorrhaging. And we get the questions, why should I bother? Some people throw in the towel. A lot of people find that once they understand why the price is moving and some of the criminals that are allowed to continue, unfortunately, for now, manipulating it. Let's say for now, manipulating it. But you've talked about the dynamics on the supply side. So I'll ask you this one. Where could we be wrong? What could we be missing, or in what way is it possible that somehow, well, we'll leave aside the timing, that this doesn't ultimately end with a higher silver price? Give me a scenario. Think of something in which we don't get to that.
The way that we could be wrong or is that, this COMEX paper dumping thing just continues to go on forever and ever. But look, I mean, here's an example of how crazy this market is. We produce 800 million ounces of silver a year, in a market where one guy can go on the COMEX and write a paper contract for 1 billion ounces in one day and sell it. All of the entire global Earth's production of silver plus 25% in one day, like that's just not sustainable. That's not a market that I think can continue indefinitely, but I don't know. My money's on it eventually changing. And well, I guess too, it's interesting to look back through history and look into other commodities where there's been concentrated short positions. And the most recent example is palladium, which kind of had a similar type of setup. And it might have been mid 2010s, Chris, like 2013 to 2015 or something like that, where the short position was broken, and the commodity ran up. And I think the thing to remember about these contracts are that they do have to be closed, right? A short position does have to be closed because at the end of the day, Tony Soprano wants his money, right? So eventually, I don't see it being able to last forever, but it needs a catalyst to break that, right? It needs something to come through and break it. And I guess the cure for low prices is low prices. But what's happening on the demand side of silver, I think we got a good chance of doing it.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it where, if they keep talking about Biden's go green, and I mean, let's not put any stock into that, but just to the degree that you look at these trends, the demand and the supply, and the type of world we're living in. I've yet to hear anyone even attempt to counter that doesn't add up. I think that's, that'll put a time limit on it. Ultimately, I think the market bubble is very close to popping with a lot of the political issues that are going on. I think silver's tied to it. They may be the very last pieces to go. The politics, along with the silver short, could be very plausible. But to me, I don't have children now. But I mean, if I one day, 30 or 40 years from now, I'm giving $20 silver to my children and I have a lot of it by then I'll know they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
I can't figure out a way that's possible. I think it's sooner than later. But again, certainly we've learned that, these things can go on for a while. But Galen,
Yep.
with that said, in terms of being one of the solutions, perhaps you could give us a quick update on Summa Silver. Been a while since we've had you on the regular
Yeah.
show as opposed to
Yeah.
Silverfest too. So what's going on there?
It has been a while. That's right. So since the last time I think I talked about the company with you, we've just been very diligently plugging away on both of our projects. We've put out some very strong results on the first project in Nevada, but then we also started drilling our second project in New Mexico, which is really a little bit of a dark horse. I think both of these projects have the potential to be a flagship for a company. So just this week, we put out some interesting core photo results where we don't have the assay results back yet for this first hole, but we hit a bunch of vein, and the vein is where the silver and the gold live. Something like 50 meters of vein in our first hole. So that's certainly the largest vein I've ever drilled. I don't expect it to be all high grade, but it just speaks to how good the system, looks just from the first hole. So Chris, if you click that first photo at the top left.
This one?
Right at the top. Yeah, that guy. Click him. See if he comes up. You can, just to give people an idea.
There we go.
Yeah, there it is. So all of the black stuff that we've circled in red, and that's just one of the geologists holding it, is a silver mineral. So we expect that intersection to be very high grade, and you just don't see that often with that clotting, the clotting black minerals all together is high grade silver. And it's usually you see it in little specks here and there, but to see it that kind of large is, that gets our geos in at site, the propeller head rock guys, super excited.
Yeah. And Galen, real quick, especially as a lot of people are new to silver, and certainly the mining stocks have been, it's just a whole different encyclopedia of knowledge. Whether they're looking at something like this or a press release, can you give them something that you've learned from your experience of, something that anytime you're looking at a new company, you want to check for, just any tip you could pass along for folks before we wrap up here?
Yeah, you always hear about, look for management. You always hear about, hey, management is great. But if you're new to this, you don't really know the difference between good management and bad management. So one of the places you can go is groups like this, where there's a community of people, and maybe someone has a little more experience than you in something that you don't know about that can help out. So I say it's, find the people who are interested in these companies, and you can learn a lot from them rather than listening just to only a guy like me. The best companies have followings, and the best companies have champions that are outside the company.
Yeah, I think that's well said, because I remember when I started getting to know some of the mining companies, it just sounded a lot the same. I'm like, all right, I just heard pitches from 30 companies. I couldn't tell you. It was like my brain was just so full of information. Although certainly one of the things that I like to think is a strength from Wall Street is being able to just look at someone like, does this fit right? Does this seem like this guy's being genuine? Also, especially can someone explain it so you can understand it? Because that's part of a CEO's job. So even if it's a complex topic, and that's why I think I tried to give a chance to most of these silver companies, at least, that contacted me. And it was, in fact, you remember I was quite busy for a while, where, before I brought anyone on, would always check with someone who knew the company better, like Kranzler, who's been doing this even longer, some of the other guys I know.
Yeah, he's great.
and also, make sure it's someone who knows it better. Is like, yes, these guys are legitimate guys doing good project. Here's, the profile, but then bring them on so you can hear the person speak. And it's like, if you're listening and the guy, you're like, geez, I wouldn't let this guy near my dog, then it's like, all right. If you don't have to be an expert or spend necessarily your whole life, if you can look for clues, who do you get along with, and not that that's the only thing. I mean, then there's other steps, but it's like, if you're, for example, amongst people who really don't bring anything to market until they've thought, how is this a good deal for everyone involved, because they genuinely, that's how they approach things. Versus, maybe you don't know how JP Morgan's going to rip you off, but if you do business with them somehow or the other, there's going to be a fee pop out when you don't expect it. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that's something anyone can do as a first step. And at least that way, you hear the people speak, and if you like what they're saying, then go read the website, learn more. And I find the good companies, will answer your questions and make themselves available.
They better. Yeah, they better, for sure.
And so with that said, Galen, as we wrap up, now you've put the pressure on. If folks would like to contact you for more information, you can give them the website, and what's the best way to get any questions answered here?
So the best way, I think, to get any questions answered, the contact information is there, the phone number, the email. But I'm also on Twitter at Galen McNamera. The company's also on Twitter at Summa Silver. Those are good ways to get in touch with us too, because we're pretty active there.
Well, I appreciate that, Galen, and it's been quite nice getting to know you over the past, I guess it's been about a half year now. And again, someone that I respect and can learn from, and also appreciate. To me, I'm big on the mindset. How do people approach things tells me a lot. And in either case, it was great having you at Silverfest. It's been great having your support on the show. And we'll have more Galen, less JP Morgan in 2022. So I hope you're having a happy holiday, and congratulations on all of your success that I believe the rest of the world is going to recognize more in the near future.
Yes, well, same to you. I think we're in for an interesting 2022, if I dare say a big 2022. So let's all make some money in 2022, guys.
Let's go, Brandon, to that, and we will see you again soon, my friend.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Chris.